and welcome to another episode of FooBar. In today's video, I want to show you how you can add Amazon Cognito authentication and authorization to an existing web application. This video is part of a longer series, so stay until the end if you want to know more about it. I have been coding for like 20 years. I know, I look young. And during that time, I think I wrote like 4 different services for doing authentication and authorization for my web apps or mobile apps. And I have seen many ways of doing it by other developers as well during my career. And what I can say that all these services that we build, they're more or less the same. Sure, there is some small here, business logic here and there, but at the end of the day, the big features are the same in all the services I have seen. However, until today, developers are still writing their own authorization and authentication services. And unless you're Auth0 or some company like that, it is wasting a lot of developer time on writing something that most probably doesn't add any business value to your organization. And then it takes time to develop and to maintain. So in this video, I want to show you how you can migrate from a custom written kind of authentication service, from how you can migrate this application from that into using Cognito. And I'm using Cognito, but I think this can apply to other services as well. And if you don't know what Cognito is, I leave you the link in the description box where I talk and introduce Cognito and the different resources, because I'm not going to get into the gist of what is Cognito, because I want to show you the different things that you can do in order to support a managed service for your authentication and authorization needs, so you don't need to write it yourself. So what I'm going to do is grab an existing MERN app, Mongo, Express, React, and Node application that lives in the cloud already, and it's hosted in a serverless service, but that's not relevant for this video. You can check my migration playlist for more on that. And this web app basically has its own service to register, do the login, do the logout, and all those things. And also has some kind of mechanisms to validate that the APIs that are being called, there is some secure APIs that only authenticated users can call, so it has the mechanisms in place to do that. So we want to replace all this logic from our application that is built by us, that is maintained by us, using this managed service, so we don't need to worry about it. So this is basically what we are going to do. My application, my backend, is hosted in this Lambda function. We will not get there, but check the migration playlist. My React part is hosted in Amplify. And then my database, my Mongo part, is hosted in Mongo Atlas. And now I will add Cognito that Amplify will call from React. It will call Cognito to do the login, the register, the forgot password, all those basic things. And also it will validate that basically this user that is logged in or not logged in has permissions, for example, to see S3 images or something like that. And then we will have the Lambda function also connecting to this Cognito to validate that some APIs are accessed only by users that have permissions to access those APIs. We have some APIs that can be only accessed by login users, so we want to make sure that the the request that get to that API is a request that is secure, that is a valid request. So I will show you changes in the front end and in the back end, and these changes are not very destructive of the code. Most of the code stays the same. We try just to replace the minimal in order to migrate out from our own service. If you like this type of videos, if you like my migration series, if you want to know more about Cognito, give me a like. This is something that a lot of you have asked me, and I work very hard to produce this content, so I want to know if you like this type of videos. And also let YouTube know, because if YouTube see a lot of likes, it will promote it further away and more people will get to know this. So let's go to the code and see this in action. So I mentioned that we have a backend in Lambda, we have a frontend in React, and we also have built the whole backend, not only the Lambda function, but all our backend. We are using AWS CDK for building that. And I have my backend stack already that has this Lambda function configure. And now I'm going to create a new stack that has the Cognito information. And I will go fast over this because I will not get into details. For that, you will have that other video where I go into the details of Cognito. But basically here we are just using all the things that CDK provide us in order to create the identity, the user pool, the app client, the identity pool, the roles that we want to provide to authenticated users and to unauthenticated users, and then we are putting everything together. So we have some parameters that we are going to export because these three values, the user pool client, and the identity pool, are very, very important, and we will need them around in our Amplify application and also in our backend. So we are going to export those values. And then we are going to start creating our infrastructure. So here we have our user pool that basically allows users to register by themselves and to verify their email by themselves as well. And then we have our app client that doesn't do much. It's just basically creating an app client for that user pool. Not much. Then we will have our identity pool. What we'll do is that will basically allows unauthenticated users gets, and then it will link the identity provider that we just created, the user pool and the user pool client. Then we are going to create the two roles, one for the unauthenticated users and one for the authenticated users. And these are the roles that we are going to give whenever a user is asking for permissions in our identity pool. So these are the credentials, the temporary credentials that Cognito is going to issue to our users when they register. So we can see the roles here, but let's not get into the details. And then finally, we have the CloudFormation identity role attachment that basically links everything together, links the roles, links the identity pool, links the user pool, and links the user pool client. So basically it says that everything, all these belongs together, and it should be happy choice here. So we can deploy this, and this will create all these resources in our AWS account. Then we need to also export these CloudFormation variables for the user pool, the identity pool, and the client, because these are going to be used in other parts of our infrastructure. So we need those. I'm exporting them, and then I'm going to create that stack in our bin folder where we have the backend stack and we have the Amplify stack, and now we are going to create the Cognito stack. So we put the Cognito stack, and basically that will receive the stage, and then we can create a stack with some name, nothing more complicated. So now we can just deploy that Cognito stack, and it will create the resources in the cloud, and we will see when this is deployed the free values that are output there. So I will speed this deployment so you can see the values. So here you can see in the outputs the identity pool, the user pool client, and the user pool ID. So those are the things that we just created and we need. The next step is in our Amplify application, we need to get those three exported values. So I will go into my Amplify application, and in the environmental variables, I will pass those three values. So I will get them from the stacks props, and then I'm going to pass it in my environmental variables. So in this way, my Amplify application can access these values and do things with it. And then I need to pass those values whenever I'm creating the stack. I have to pass the user pool ID, and I need to pass the identity pool ID and the app client as well. So now when that's done, we can deploy the Amplify stack. So then Amplify will get those environmental variables, and we can use them in our Amplify application. This is our React application that will be now able to access these free values. So this is very convenient. So we build them in our infrastructure as code, and then our frontend gets it as well. So now we just deploy everything, and we come back when everything is deployed. So now we have our backend kind of ready now we need to do our front end. So you can see that everything is deployed in Amplify. In the Amplify application, the free values are there. So how we access those values? Well, we go to our front end app, and in the Amplify YAML, that is the build configuration file that Amplify will use in order to grab those environmental variables that we have in the Amplify resource and pass it to the hosted application. We need to put these free values, like basically grab this environmental variable and place it in here. And that's what it will do. So now these free values are available in our application. And if we want to test this locally, we can basically build this in our .m. But I will talk more about testing locally these type of applications in a different video. So I will not go in there. So now after we have everything configured, we can go to our file. I have in this React application, I have done a little cheat where I have all the requests to the server in one file, that is the user action file, where I have all the backend requests, so then it's easier for me to modify them, and I only have to modify like a file in order to do all the changes. So in this file, you will see all the operations that we are doing against the different APIs that we have. So we have the register user, we have the login, we have the logout, we have everything here. And we can start changing them in order to use Amplify instead of using, and we can start modifying them in order to use Cognito instead of using our own APIs. So let's start setting up this thing and see what we need to do. The first thing we need to do, because I will be using the Amplify libraries to connect to Cognito so that I don't need to manage that connection, is to create an AWS config file. That is what Amplify needs to ingest the right format to get configured. So I will pass the environmental variables that we just defined in the right format for Amplify libraries to configure. So I need to pass the authentication object with the identity pool, the region, the identity pool region, the user pool ID, and the web app. So all these variables are basically environmental variables that we have. So very simple. And this is an important file. When you're using Amplify CLI, this is auto-generated. But because I'm creating my own AWS resources, I need to create this file. So we have it here. And then we can go back to our user actions. That is the file where I have created all my APIs towards my backend. And here I will start importing some dependencies. So the first one is the Amplify and Amplify Auth, that we are going to use the libraries for authentication. And this will help me to do the sign-in, the registration, forget password, and all those things, getting tokens and all that. It's done automatically. I don't need to fight with Cognito SDK. Then I'm going to get the AWS config, and I'm going to configure Amplify with that exports. I need to install Amplify, and then we are ready to start. So npm I amplify, and woof, we are ready. So that's something important because we have not yet configured it. So now our dependencies are in place, and we can start working with the first things that we want to replace, that is the register user. Because I don't want to change much of the logic of my application, when I'm doing the registration, I want to still keep the register user in my original database. So I will do the registration through Cognito first, and then if that registration is successful, I will invoke my registration endpoint as well. So in that way, I don't need to change the backend logic when a new user appears, because there is a lot of logic that thinks that the users needs to be in this specific format, in this specific database. So if I start modifying that, then I need to change a lot of the code. And the idea of this series is to do as much lift and shift as we can, just remove and change little pieces of this application. So this is one of the decisions I'm doing. So when I'm doing the registration of the user, you can see that I'm just using the auth library. I'm doing the sign up. I'm passing all the values that are passed in the registration form, the email, the username, the password, the blah, 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 blah. And then I'm calling my endpoint to do registration as well. So that will save all this data in the MongoDB database, and then we don't need to change the business logic. So then in my registration React page, you can see that I'm calling that register user. I don't need to change that, but because I want to take advantage of the confirmation mechanism that Cognito provides, I could avoid that by writing a Lambda function and auto confirm all the users. But I kind of like to send a verification email automatically and then getting the users to confirm that email. I will change a little bit the registration page, but that's because of me. I could add a Lambda function to that for me. But I want to change the registration page, and instead of jumping directly to the login, to jump to the confirmation page that I'm going to build in a second. So I will just change that when the user is registered successfully to call this /confirm, and then the user will need to put their email and the confirmation code that they are getting. So this is kind of handy. So now we can create that confirmation page, and then basically it's a form. The code is linked below, so you can go and check it out. This is a super simple form where I'm doing some validation to the form, basically the numbers and things like that. And there I'm also calling this endpoint, this confirm new user, that is basically calling the Auth Amplify library to make sure that the confirmation is valid. So I don't need to handle that confirmation. So you can see here that everything is confirmed. And then when we finish confirming, we can move to the login. So the confirmation of new users is as simple as do auth.confirm, sign up, and pass the email and the code to that endpoint. So then we will be testing everything. So at least the registration should be working. I just do my register, I put the password, I put another password, I duplicate it, everything that is valid in the front end, but it's also validated in the back end, and poof, nothing appears in my confirmation page. But we can see that Cognito is being created. I forgot to add my confirmation page to my app.js. So here I will just add that confirmation page and then add that route to my routing. That's why it was not working. And then basically I save, and I can see it immediately that now my page appear, and I can put the user name that is the email, and the verification code that I got in my email here to verify that it's working. And then when I press confirm, I should be directed to the login. But if we try to log in, we will be logging with our API, that it's not the Cognito. So that's something we need to change. So if I press login here, we can see that it's not calling Cognito, that is just calling the login endpoint, and things are not really working. So, and then there is also some error in that auth mechanism. So let's try to fix all that. So the first thing we can fix is the login mechanism. So now we are calling our own endpoint for login, and we need to replace that to call Cognito. We don't need to call our own API, and we don't need an API for login, because we don't care if the user is logged in or not in our backend. We will do that validation using tokens. So basically we just use the auth.signin, that is an API provided by Amplify that calls Cognito to make sure that the username and password is valid, and boom, now we can basically do the login again, and we will see that Cognito is being called. But there's still some issues with our authentication, so we can see that things are still broken out there, and we can see that auth is false even though we are logged in, and things are not staying in our menu. It doesn't know that we are logged in, so we still have not finished our migration. So the next thing we need to change is this auth mechanism. And this auth mechanism, what it's doing is to verify that the user is logged in. Now this validation is done in the backend. Basically, we have when we log in, we have a track of which users are logged in or not, and then we can track that authentication. Now we want that authentication knowledge be managed by Cognito, so we don't need to handle the sessions basically. So there is this auth endpoint that we have been calling, and it's doing a lot of the magic. And what I want to do is to still call that endpoint, because we will want to do some validations in the backend, and we need to get some information whenever to validate that a user is kind of registered, but we want to change a little bit the logic. So the first thing we are going to do is to call the authentication from Amplify to tell me if the user is validated or not. So we are going to get the authorization header. And basically this returns me a token. And then I can pass that JWT token to the auth, and the auth can validate the call itself. So we do the validation in the front end, but we also do the validation in the backend if we can call this, this API. So basically in that way, it's extremely secure. So we can write that get authentication header method. Basically what it's doing is calling the auth, and it's getting the JWT token and creating this authorization header that then we are passing to the auth endpoint. So this is basically sending a JWT token to the backend, and then we can validate that in the backend. So because we are using these URLs that are provided by Lambda functions URL, so we want to make sure like we cannot validate each endpoint individually. For example, using API gateway custom authorizers, we could do that. But with Lambda functions URL, we cannot validate each individual path. So then we want to validate it in the backend, making sure that the call is authenticated, and then move forward. So we are going to run that authentication. So if we go to the backend, you can see that this auth endpoint is pointing to a middleware. And this is used basically in a way that everybody that needs to have an authentication check, like all the APIs that needs to be secure, are using this middleware to check. And this middleware is just basically checking that the token is valid. Now it's just using some token that we just generated manually, but we don't want that. We want to verify it using Cognito. So I will remove everything from here, and I will build my own implementation to check that the token that is coming through the authorization header is valid. And for that, I'm going to use the AWS SDK. I'm going to use version 3, where I can import just the module of Cognito to validate, to get the information for my client. And then I'm going to use this library, AWS JWT Verify, to verify the token. So this is quite handy. So I'm installing both of these libraries. So then I'm going to add a couple of variables there, the user ID and the user pool ID that I need to pass to my backend. And that's a different story for a different video, but just trust me, they're there. And then we are going to re-implement the auth method. And here we are going to get the token from the header. That's the first thing we are going to do. And basically we are just getting the JWT token. With that token, now what we can do is start verifying the token. So we can call that verified method, and then we can get the Cognito user for that token. We can get the Cognito user, and that will return us an email. Because we are using Mongo, and Mongo has their own kind of way of generating IDs, and it's not the email, and we don't want to change the logic. I'm getting the email. And then I'm basically a check in Mongo database that is finding users by this attribute, that is the email, and that returns me the user. And I need this because that's how it was implemented before, that is returning the user for each authentication, and then it can do things. So we don't want to change the inputs and outputs of this auth, because we want the business logic from our application to stay the same. So the important methods here are not the find by email, but the how we do the verification of the token and how we get the Cognito user. So let's write that verification token thing, and we can see that we are calling that JWT library. So what we are going to do is to pass the user pool and the client ID and then the token, and then we can verify that it's a valid JWT token. And this basically means that we can move forward. Then we are going to get the Cognito user, and we can use the token again. We could just basically get the Cognito user, and if something failed, we can return it, but I like to show you that library if you need it. And then we pass the access token again, this JWT token, and with that token, the AWS SDK can basically get the user. And then it returns all the user with all its attributes, and I'm just getting the third attribute, that is the email, and I'm returning that, so then we can search it in our database. So now we go back to our roots, and you can see that the auth is there, and we are basically getting all this information in the auth. And then we can remove the login and the logout because we don't need it. We're just using directly the libraries, but the register we need and the auth as well. So let's remove the login and logout. That is handled by Amplify and Cognito. Then register, we need to write it in the database, and auth, we want to handle it here as well. So this is our backend. We just need to redeploy everything to make sure that it's working in the cloud. I'm running it locally. That's another video. That's a different story. If you want to know how I'm doing it, keep an eye on this series. But let's run the front end and the back end locally and see what happens. So I'm going to my store. I'm logged in, and then I can click on different things, and we can see that it's calling the endpoints and things are working. So that's good. We can log out. We can see that things are being called. The Cognito endpoint is being called. We can log in. We can see that things are moving forward. So this is a mix of using Cognito in the front end and in the back end. But there are still some errors, and we will see it in a second. So now I'm registered, I'm logged in, and I can basically click on some other of the buttons. So for example, I can add to cart, and you can see that there I got an error. So that's not good. We don't want those errors. There is some authentication error in those APIs. So that's, and now my menu start collapsing again. So what is going on here? So let's see. The get history also is failing. So there is some failures when calling some of the endpoints. So what we need to do is go to our app.js and check all the pages that need to have authentication. So you can see here, I'm again using another middleware to handle authentication. So some pages need authentication, it says true, and some pages says that they don't need authentication. So for example, the login page is false, the landing page is null, it doesn't matter, registration page doesn't need authentication. But when we get to pages like upload or then history or cart, we need to be authenticated. And basically what we are doing is not passing the authentication token. We are not passing the JWT token to those places, so then it's failing. So we need to make sure that we are passing the authentication header when we are calling those endpoints in order for this to work. So we can go back to our user actions, that is that file where I have all my calls, and then make sure that we are passing the right header. So then the endpoints are secured. So let's go to the user actions. And for example, let's go to add to cart or whatever, of whichever you like of these. Well, you need to do it in all of the all of the endpoints that needs to be secure. What we do is we get the authorization header, as I showed you before, that returns this JWT token header, and then we pass that to the call to our backend as a header. So we need to do that in all the different requests. This is for the add to cart, for the history, for whatever we need authentication. We need to pass the valid header. So then I do it for everything, and we can check it out in the website. So let's go to my website. Now the history works because I fixed it there. And then if I open one product, I can click on the add cart and it works. And also I can remove from cart, and then my menu doesn't get crazy anymore. So I can play with it and things are kind of working. So that's good. So that's what we want. There is still a small detail about authentication that we want to fix, and that's basically the product page when we have this button. So in the product page, if we are logged out, we have still the button add to cart, and I don't want that. We should only see that button when we are logged in. So we are going to fix that. And for doing that, I'm going to add a new method in my user actions that is called user sign in, and that will call function in the auth mechanism that basically tells me if there is a user register and shows or don't show the button. So I'm basically calling that in my detail page, and if the user is signing, it will show the button. If the user is not signed in, it will not show the button. And in that way, it's handled by Amplify, so we can have dynamic behavior in the same page. So I'm just changing that code. The code is available in GitHub. You can check it down in the description box. But basically, it's just adding an React hook that is checking if the user is signing, modifying a variable, and then doing an if in the page if the user is there or not. So then when we have that in place, then we are going to test this. And we can see we are logged out, the button is not there, and then we logged in, and the button will start appearing. And you will see the button, and you can add to cart and do all those things. So this works as we wanted. So that's the code for this, and I mentioned many times at the beginning of the video and around this video that this is part of a longer series of videos where I show you how to migrate this MERN application from a traditional infrastructure to serverless to the cloud. So if you are interested in this type of content and you want to see more about the different bits and pieces, I'll let you know that there is a playlist with the whole series there. Maybe they're not now when you're watching this, but they will be in the future, so subscribe. A couple of videos that shows the whole migration process from end to end, so you will not miss anything. And then there is bits pieces of videos like this one that show you how to solve one particular problem, so you can choose how you watch this series, what is more convenient for you. So stay tuned to this channel to know all the videos that are coming up, and if you like this video, like it, and I see you in the next episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!